All right, everybody, welcome. Get ready to dive into some seriously deep philosophical waters today because we're tackling Heidegger, the end of philosophy, to be exact.
Whoa, yeah, diving right in.
We are, and specifically, we're going to be exploring Heidegger's ideas about metaphysics. But don't worry,
Yeah,
you do not need a philosophy degree to follow along with us.
that's right. I mean, Heidegger can be, let's be honest, a little dense
Yeah.
at times,
Yeah.
but we are here to break it down for you. And at the heart of it all is this idea of being,
Yes.
which, before you think it's just some abstract philosophical concept,
Right.
it actually has huge implications for how we understand ourselves and our place in the world.
Exactly. And Heidegger argues that to really wrap our heads around his view of being, we need to take a little trip through history. We're going all the way back to the ancient Greeks.
Okay.
So where do we begin?
Well, Heidegger, he points out that for centuries, Western thought has been shaped by this fundamental question. What is the nature of being? And it's a question that's been approached in many different ways and continues to be, frankly.
So give me an example. What are some of the different ways that philosophers have tackled this question of being?
Okay, well, take Plato, for instance. Remember Plato?
Oh, yes, of course.
Ancient Greek philosopher.
Right.
He believed that the world we see around us, the physical world, this is all just a shadow.
Uh-huh.
Just a shadow of a higher realm of perfect, unchanging forms.
Right.
What he called ideas.
Right. So like the idea of a chair,
Exactly.
which then influences all the chairs we see in the real world.
Yes, the essence of things.
Yes.
And Heidegger, he calls this focus on ideas the concept of whatness.
Whatness. Yes.
It's about defining things by their ideal form, their unchanging characteristics.
Okay.
But, as Heidegger points out, there's another really key figure in Greek philosophy who had a very different take. And that is, of course, Aristotle.
And how did Aristotle's view differ from Plato's?
Well, you see, while Plato was preoccupied with these eternal, unchanging ideas,
Right.
Aristotle was much more interested in the actual process of becoming,
Oh.
of change and movement,
Okay.
which he called energia.
So it's less about the what and more about the how, the dynamic unfolding of existence.
You got it.
Okay.
And Heidegger, he picks up on this distinction between whatness and this process of becoming, because he argues that somewhere along the way, Western thought got a little sidetracked
Sidetracked. Okay.
by focusing too much on the whatness of things.
Interesting. So instead of focusing on that dynamic process of being,
Yeah.
Heidegger thinks we became fixated on the end product, the concrete things that exist.
Exactly. And he uses this really fascinating example to illustrate this. He points to the Latin word existentia,
Okay.
which originally meant stepping out or emerging.
Mm.
Heidegger suggests that this word, initially, it captured that dynamic nature of being, that constant state of becoming.
Okay, I'm following you so far.
Yeah.
So how did we go from existentia as this dynamic, like stepping out, to a more static understanding of existence?
Well, Heidegger argues that, over time, existentia lost its connection to that original meaning
Yeah.
and became more about static existence and causality.
Okay.
It became less about the ongoing process of becoming and more about what caused this thing to exist.
Mm.
We shifted our focus to the end product, the being, rather than the ongoing process of being.
We went from how to what?
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is fascinating, but it also feels a bit abstract.
Sure.
How does this connect to our lives, to the way we experience the world today?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us perfectly to the next stage in Heidegger's philosophical journey,
Okay.
the modern era and the rise of what he calls subjectivity.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What does Heidegger mean by subjectivity, and how does it tie into this shift away from a more dynamic understanding of being?
Well, for Heidegger, subjectivity represents a further entrenchment of this focus on the whatness of things.
Okay.
But with a twist. It's not just about the whatness of objects anymore, but the whatness of ourselves,
Yeah.
of the individual I.
The I. Okay.
And he sees this as a direct result of a philosophical figure I'm sure you're familiar with, René Descartes.
Ah, Descartes. Famous for, I think, therefore I am.
Exactly.
I have a feeling Heidegger might not be a fan.
You're catching on.
Okay.
Heidegger sees Descartes' famous declaration as a pivotal moment in what he calls the forgetting of being.
The forgetting of being, all right.
By placing the individual I, the thinking subject, at the center of everything, Descartes inadvertently cemented this notion that being itself is something we can grasp, define, and control.
So instead of experiencing being as this dynamic, ever-unfolding process,
Yeah,
as Aristotle did, we've come to see it as something static, something we can analyze and define from the perspective of our own individual minds.
exactly.
Yeah.
And Heidegger believes this shift has huge implications for how we understand not only ourselves, but also our relationship with the world around us.
This is where it gets really interesting for me.
Yeah.
How does this focus on the individual I, this subjectivity, as Heidegger calls it,
Yeah.
affect how we interact with the world?
Well, Heidegger argues that it leads to a very specific understanding of being, one that's tied to the concept of will.
Being as will. Now, that's a thought-provoking concept. So
Mhm.
instead of being just being,
Yeah.
it's now something we exert our will upon. We
Right.
become the masters of our own existence.
It's tempting to see it that way, right?
Yeah.
And Heidegger does connect this idea of being as will to figures like Schopenhauer,
Okay.
who viewed the will as this kind of blind, striving force,
Right.
and Nietzsche, who celebrated the will to power.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to this that Heidegger is very wary of, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, so we're talking about this idea of being as will with philosophers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. They see it as this powerful force. But you're saying Heidegger had some reservations about this idea, especially in our modern world.
Exactly. You see, for Heidegger, the issue isn't the concept of will itself,
Okay.
but rather how it plays out when it becomes the dominant way of understanding being.
Okay.
He worries that it leads to a kind of instrumentalization of the world,
Okay.
where everything, even human existence, gets reduced to its usefulness, its function.
So instead of experiencing the world in all its richness and complexity, we start to see it primarily in terms of what we can get out of it.
Yes.
How we can bend it to our will.
You've hit the nail on the head. Heidegger calls this machination, this relentless drive to calculate.
Optimize and control.
And he saw modern technology as the ultimate expression of this mindset.
Okay, so that's where technology comes in. It's fascinating because we often think of technology as this tool that gives us more control over our lives.
Right.
But Heidegger seems to be suggesting that it can actually have the opposite effect.
That's exactly right. Heidegger argues that while technology promises us mastery over the world, it can actually end up mastering us, trapping us in this cycle of constant production and consumption.
Can you give me a concrete example of what this machination looks like in our day-to-day lives?
Well, think about, I don't know, how often you scroll through social media.
Okay.
You're bombarded with images, updates, and notifications,
Yeah.
all vying for your attention. Heidegger would argue that this constant consumption of information, this endless scrolling, can actually make us feel emptier, further from being, rather than closer.
That's such a good point. I know I've definitely fallen into that trap of mindlessly scrolling, only to come away feeling more drained and disconnected.
And that's because this kind of engagement with technology doesn't allow us to be truly present to the world, to ourselves, or to being. Instead, it traps us in this endless cycle of seeking the next bit of information, the next dopamine hit.
It's like we're constantly chasing after something, but we're never quite sure what it is or if we'll ever catch it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for Heidegger, this sense of emptiness, this feeling of being adrift, is a symptom of what he calls the forgetting of being.
Right.
We become so caught up in the whatness of things, in the functionality of technology, that we lose sight of the bigger picture, the deeper meaning of existence itself.
So if this machination, this constant striving for control and optimization is leading us further from being, what's the alternative?
Yeah.
Is Heidegger suggesting we all go off the grid, ditch our smartphones, and live in a cabin in the woods?
Well, Heidegger wasn't advocating for a complete rejection of technology or a return to some pre-modern utopia. Instead, he called for a different way of relating to technology, one that he believed could actually help us to recover our relationship with being.
Okay, so there's hope. We don't have to renounce all modern conveniences.
Right.
But how does Heidegger propose we approach technology differently?
Heidegger suggests that we need to move beyond seeing technology as merely a means to an end. We need to find a way to engage with it more thoughtfully, more authentically.
Okay.
And that starts with what he calls recollection.
Recollection.
Yes.
That sounds intriguing, but I have to admit I'm a little fuzzy on what that actually means.
Recollection, for Heidegger, is not about remembering specific facts or events. It's about remembering being itself, which he believes has been obscured by centuries of metaphysical thinking that
Mhm.
focuses on the whatness of things
Mm.
rather than the thatness of their being.
So it's about shifting our focus from defining and analyzing the world
Right.
to experiencing it more directly.
You got it.
Okay.
And for Heidegger, one way to cultivate this sense of recollection is through what he calls releasement.
Okay. Another intriguing term. Releasement. It sounds a bit like letting go.
It is about letting go, in a way. It's about releasing our grip on the need to control, the desire to dominate, and instead allowing ourselves to be open to the mystery and wonder of existence.
That sounds like a tall order, especially in a world that often feels like it's spinning faster and faster. But how does this releasement relate to technology specifically? Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Absolutely. Think about the last time you were captivated by, I don't know, a piece of music,
Okay.
a work of art, or even a beautiful sunset.
You mean those moments where you're completely absorbed in the experience, where you lose track of time and even yourself for a little while?
Exactly. Those moments of pure presence are what Heidegger is getting at with releasement.
Okay.
And he believed that technology, when approached with the right attitude, can actually facilitate these kinds of experiences.
So it's not about ditching our smartphones and computers, but about engaging with them in a way that helps us to be more present, more open to the world around us.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that technology, at its core, is not just about things, but about being.
Okay.
It's about the way technology reveals the world to us, the way it shapes our understanding of what it means to exist.
That's quite a profound way to think about technology.
Yeah.
But if even Heidegger isn't saying to abandon technology, how do we navigate this world of ever-advancing tech without succumbing to machination? How do we find that balance between control and releasement?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Heidegger doesn't offer any easy answers.
Yeah.
But he does give us a starting point,
Okay.
a new way of framing the conversation.
Okay.
He encourages us to ask ourselves, how can technology help us to remember being? How can it help us to experience the world in a more authentic and meaningful way?
So it's about shifting our perspective, changing our relationship with technology from one of mastery and control to one of curiosity and openness. Instead of asking, what can technology do for me? We start asking, what can technology reveal to me about the world?
Yes.
About myself, about being?
Now you're getting it.
Okay.
And that's where things get really interesting, because it requires us to rethink not only our relationship with technology, but also our understanding of truth itself.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Let's dive into this idea of truth and how Heidegger challenges our traditional views on it. That's where we'll pick up in the final part of our deep dive into Martin Heidegger. So we've been talking about Heidegger's call for, releasement, for a less controlling and more receptive relationship with technology. And you're saying this also requires us to, rethink our whole understanding of truth?
Yeah, it is radical.
That sounds like a pretty radical idea.
It is, but it's also incredibly relevant
Yeah, okay.
to how we live our lives, especially today.
Mm-hmm.
See, we often think of truth as something objective, right? Something out there
Right.
waiting to be discovered. But Heidegger, he challenges this view.
Okay.
He's suggesting that truth is not something we find,
Okay.
but something that's revealed, something that unfolds through our engagement with the world,
Okay.
and importantly, with technology.
So instead of truth being this fixed point,
Yeah.
it becomes more about the process of uncovering, or maybe even co-creating meaning through our interactions with the world and technology.
You're exactly right. Heidegger uses this beautiful German word, aletheia,
Okay.
to describe truth.
Okay.
It originally meant unconcealment or disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, truth isn't about accumulating facts. It's about opening ourselves up to new ways of seeing and understanding.
I can see how technology fits into this. It's not just about the information we get from our devices,
Right.
but about how those devices change our perception, how they reveal the world to us in new ways.
Exactly. I mean, think about how photography, for instance,
Yeah, it is.
has transformed our understanding of the world.
Yeah.
It's allowed us to capture moments in time,
Right.
to see things from different perspectives,
Yeah.
to reveal hidden details we might never have noticed with naked eye.
Or even something like Google Maps, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not just a tool for navigation. It's completely changed how we understand space,
Right.
distance, our relationship to the places we inhabit.
Those are great examples. And for Heidegger, this ability of technology to unconceal the world, to bring forth new possibilities for understanding, this is precisely where its true potential lies.
But If we're always looking to technology for these grand revelations, are we risking falling back into that trap of machination, always seeking the next big thing, the next technological fix?
That's the tightrope we have to walk.
Right.
Heidegger wouldn't say that every new gadget or
Gosh.
app brings us closer to being.
Yeah.
He'd say it's about how we approach technology.
Okay.
It's about our underlying attitude.
Right.
Are we using it to control and dominate, or are we using it to open ourselves up to new possibilities, to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world?
So it's not about rejecting technology altogether, but about cultivating a more mindful, almost reverent relationship with it.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy, right?
Right.
I mean, we live in a world that's constantly pushing for more efficiency, more productivity, more consumption. But Heidegger's challenge to us is to resist that pull, to find moments of quiet reflection,
Right.
to really ask ourselves how we can use technology in a way that aligns with our values
Yeah.
and brings us closer to a more authentic experience of being.
It's a tall order,
It is.
but an incredibly important one. Heidegger gives us a lot to think about in terms of
Yeah.
how we engage with technology and the world around us. So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, is there a final takeaway, a sort of Heidegger in a nutshell that you could leave us with?
I think if Heidegger were here with us today,
Yeah.
he'd urge us to remember that being is not something we can grasp or control,
Okay.
but something we participate in, something we experience through our engagement with the world, with each other, and yes, even with technology.
That's a powerful thought. And it's a good reminder that technology, for all of its potential pitfalls,
Yeah.
can also be a powerful tool for connection, for understanding, and for revealing the mystery and wonder of existence itself.
Absolutely. And ultimately, I think that's what Heidegger wanted us to see,
Yeah.
that technology is not our enemy, but rather a mirror reflecting our own hopes, our fears, and ultimately our capacity for being.
It's certainly given us a lot to reflect on.
It has.
So, to our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How has this conversation changed the way you think about technology? What
Yeah.
resonates with you? Join the conversation on our social media channels and share your reflections. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.